Hello and welcome to my new tutorial. We're going to make a waistcoat today. A total waistcoat from the beginning to the end. That's why this particular video is going to be a little bit longer than the other ones you've seen so far by me. This is the finished waistcoat already, which we're going to do. I've chosen a very nice soft stretch jeans material in two colors. For the front, this one with a little bit of flowers on, and for the back I've chosen it plain white in unicolor, in white, with this little belt on the back on. Watch it carefully in case if you think this video is too long for you, then just speed it up on your PC and you can see it in a much shorter version. But now we're just going to do it. Watch it and do it. My cutting for this waistcoat are already done. I've chosen for the inside not a typical lining, as my material is a very thin, slightly stretchable jeans material. I've chosen the same for the inside because it's always nicer when you have a little top on in the summer. If that material, a jeans material, is on your skin, it's a nicer feeling than if you put a proper lining in. If you have a pattern that does not have a seam dividing the front and the back, you can always just draw any kind of line where you would like to have a seam. Cut your pattern apart, but then when you do the cutting for the material, don't forget to add your 1 centimeter for the sewing. On this waistcoat, as on all my, or mainly all my parts that I do and sewing I do, I always add 1 centimeter allowance for my seams, for all seams. So this is the extra seam I created into this. And also, I don't like a total simple waistcoat. So a total simple waistcoat like my original pattern was, does not have any nice lapels or anything. So I just draw myself and make myself a new pattern, which I took exactly that edge and did a drawing on a piece of paper first to create this little kind of lapel to go on the front, because it will look, the waistcoat looks so much nicer. The same on the back. This seam didn't used to be in the pattern, in the original one. So all I did is I drew myself a line on the paper that I had, added my 1 centimeter for the seam that I need, and I have a real nice seam in my back on both sides. As well, I would like to have a little belt in the back in here from each side where a button is going to be on. That I cut extra as well and marked myself where I will put this. You need, if you have the same lining as the main material, from the side pieces you need 4. From the back, as this is doubled here already, you only need 2. But on all the other parts, front and sides, you always need 4 parts for everyone. So let's get started. We start by preparing the little belts for the back. You put on the long side, the right side towards the inside, and you stitch one of the short and the long side together. A good forward and backward stitch in the beginning, the same when you stitch down here. You do exactly the same with the other half of the belt. The right side is the inside. You close one of the short sides and go down the long side. Now you cut the corners a little bit off on both of them, otherwise when you turn them around you will not get a nice corner. Push it in. Take a little stick that you might have. In my case, I do this with my scissors. I'm used to this. If you haven't done this and you're trying to, then be careful not to push your scissors through in the corners. Then you would have to start all over again. Then when you've cut the corners before nicely, you can really nice push with your scissors or the stick that you have your corners out very well. Do the same with the other one. Push it in the top with your fingers a little bit. Then take your stick or whichever item you do have for this and pull it around so you got the right side facing you now. As well, carefully and nicely in a square, in a right angle, push your corners through. Now we're going to stitch this as I have planned to stitch this waistcoat all the way on all the edges 1 millimeter. We're doing this right here. Start on the side where you have the seam, because then automatically the other side is flattened anyway and finished the way you need it. You go all along the finished edges of this belt. Do exactly the same with the second one. Do an even stitch. I've chosen to do this by 1 millimeter all the way around on the whole waistcoat. If you would like to have 5 millimeters, of course, then you just do this. This doesn't matter. It's your waistcoat and it's your choice. Now I take my lapel. Had to search for the word. The lapel. Also, I told you before on the cuttings, you have 4 pieces of the lapel, and you do a 1 centimeter seam on the edge where the lapel will be finished. Told you need 4 pieces. You put the right side inside and you stitch 1 centimeter seam. If you're not sure if you get these angles of this lapel correctly, then do a little drawing and measure it first, or make you some points where you like to turn to get them very even, or check it afterwards as I show you here. Check that you have the seams and the lengths of this lapel the same lengths. Again, now we have to cut the corners before we turn this around. And into this corner where you turned, you need to cut in onto the last stitch that is there, but don't cut the stitch through. Only all the way directly onto it, as you would do when you're cutting in for a pocket. You have to be exactly on that last stitch. You turn those inside out. Push the corners nicely through. Take again some stick or whichever tool you have to push these corners out nicely. Do exactly the same to the other lapel. Maybe you decide you don't want to stitch the waistcoat at all, then you have to iron all the pieces now. But I'm not ironing this, I'm stitching my edges. Your decision, your design, your waistcoat. I'm doing it 1 millimeter. Make sure to get the edges really nicely onto the corner, onto the edges, that nothing is facing to the left or the right. It should be as even as possible. Again and again you can rubble the edge out. You rub it out with the fingers. You heard the boss talking here next to me. Sometimes his English is a little bit better than mine. That's why he's got to help me here. And we're closing right away all the open edges that are there at the moment. Take the other lapel, do exactly the same. Now if you have different threads on the upper and the under, then make sure you will stitch this as a pair, because if you have a 80 thickness on the top and, as an example, 120 on the bottom, it would not look right if you stitch both these lapels always from the same, let's say from the bottom up, because then on one side you have a thin thread on the top and on the other side the thick thread. So make sure you will stitch this as a pair. Do it nice and even. Take your time for it. You don't have to try to catch up with me. Just enjoy it. It's not a race. I'm just trying to do it as fast as I can, so this video will not take half a day. So my lapels are finished. Now I take the back and just hold those two little belts on the sides, on which are marked already there on the side. I just stitch it on 5 millimeter width, not a centimeter, because I don't want this seam to show later on. That's my back. So there are my two belt pieces stitched on. Now I take the front pieces and take these prepared lapels and stitch them onto the front, where they will be exactly then when the waistcoat is finished. Also here, do not do this a centimeter, only do it about 5 millimeter widths, because later on we do not want this seam to show out. This is only to hold it in position for when we go around the whole waistcoat. Same with the other side. 5 millimeter stitching to hold this lapel onto my front part here. Now my little preparations are done, and I will go to my safety machine and stitch those parts together. Now I will take all the little side pieces on my safety machine here and stitch them on. This is my first front part. Make sure on all these seams that I allowed 1 centimeter seam to put the edges correctly together. Otherwise your shape of the waistcoat, or whichever part you're stitching, could get smaller or bigger than you actually had planned to do. On my safety machine, this is of course very handy to have. All little bits from the material are being cut on the edges, and I have a very even 1 centimeter seam here. On my safety machine, and this is usually with all those machines, I will add the pieces onto each other, as you can see now, because these machines, when you stitch just without material underneath, they like to unthread. So this is my inside front. I take the side piece the same, always put right to right in the inside of the material. See, I add these onto each other so my thread will not slip out of the needles out. As I'm stitching with the safety machine with 5 different threads, that gives me the safety seam and the cleaning off seam at the same time. This is the other side from my front. I'm stitching that on as well. And now I have to take my back, or my two backs, as I got an inside one and an outside one. I take the first side piece, starting on the bottom to stitch from the bottom seam practically towards the armhole. If you have a very long waistcoat that you're making, maybe make yourself in the middle somewhere a mark to know exactly where you have to stitch these together. I take the other side, right onto right material. The left side of the material is facing you. Edge on edge, 1 centimeter. Don't forget which widths you added onto your cutting. That was my inside back, practically the lining you could call it. And here is the one I prepared with the little belts on already. I start on the bottom again. Everything edge on edge. Doing an even seam to the shoulder, and only one more part to be stitched on here. There I start on the shoulder, and always stitch on the side pieces. Don't stitch on the middle piece. That means put your back or your front, the big piece, down, and then put the side pieces on top. Never the other way around. If you're doing this waistcoat, try really to follow my instructions to get it right, and do it exactly like this. I add a little piece to make sure for my next job that my threads didn't come out. And then I'm on the way to my normal sewing machine again to stitch all the sides over. Here I show you all the parts that we just stitched together. My inside, my lining back, my main back, all in white. My inside front lining, the other side, and my fronts for the outer. And all these seams that we just stitched together on the safety, we will stitch over now 1 millimeter on the middle part of the back, not on the sides. You can stitch on the sides, but that's not the classic way. You would normally always stitch on the middle part and not on the sides. And you go all the way down. Turn the part around. The seam is lying towards the middle. You have to grab sometimes underneath to push it there. Unless you maybe iron the pieces first, then you don't have to do this pulling what I'm doing, then you've prepared it on your ironing board. I just take it and stitch over it. I'll stitch over this later. That part is finished, prepared for later. I take the other back, my outside back. Again, I put the seam towards the middle of the back, towards the big part. And now you got two choices. We're getting to this belt here. You could put the belt, the seam is towards the middle, and then the belt you could lie over and stitch over there. But that doesn't look so nice. It's better to put the belt on the other side, but the seam is all lying towards the middle, and you just stitch over there. It's a much better look for this belt when it's lying loosely there, and it's a different effect as well if you do it like that instead of stitching over there. Same on the other side. You're lying the seam underneath towards the middle of the back. The little belt is lying on the side at the moment, and you stitch all the way to the top, to the shoulder. That's also finished, prepared. I put that away for the moment. Here comes the front, the lining part. As well, here I stitch on the big part. The seam is lying towards the front, towards the middle of the waistcoat. I have to grab underneath again to make sure my seam is lying on the part where I'm stitching on. Same with the other one. And you can see to always make a pair of everything when I started stitching from the top down. Here I stitch from the bottom up towards the armhole. And here we come to the main part. Exactly the same thing. Here I'm starting on the bottom, going towards the armhole, and again here my 1mm stitching is on the big part towards the front, the middle of the waistcoat. Here I start on the sleeve, on the armhole part, and stitch that one down. All the little jobs are done. We're starting now to put our parts together, to add them. Therefore, we take one of the lining fronts and one of my main fronts here. Put right side on right side. Do the same with the other one. Put it in position already. And now we will stitch the front 1 centimeter down. From the shoulder to the bottom of the coat. And we will leave the shoulder open and the side open. I put the main material on the bottom and I stitch on the lining, because that's always helpful if you have a bad transporter on your machine, which rather wants to hold in the bottom a little bit of material in. That is always better for the roll over later, and the lining in that case is better if it's rather a touch tighter, which you might not even see, but it usually happens that way. As you can see here, I started on the bottom, practically the seam of the waistcoat. Now I'm going up the front, the middle front. Here comes my lapel part underneath that we stitched on earlier on. And everywhere you do 1 centimeter, lying edge on edge, that it's all even, and go up to the shoulder. There you finish. You're going to be doing your back and forward stitching. Leave the shoulder part open. And now just do the round from the armhole, 1 centimeter. Watch again that you have edge on edge lying. If your cutting was correctly and very even, then also for the stitching they got to be evenly together. Now you take your scissors and you cut all the way around the roundabout you do little cuts in everywhere. Depending on if you have a very hard material, you need to do more cuts. This material, the stretch one, is quite soft. I don't need so many. Then you just take a little bit of all the corners off, again to be able to really push the corners through very nicely. From the side which you left open, you put your hand in and pull the shoulder that is still open. You pull it through. Now you take your tool for pushing the corners out. Pulling all the edges for the start. Now I just see that I got to just open this little bit of my lapel, which I fastened on the shoulder, as I just decided I want to even stitch along there for this lapel, then really to nicely roll over. But first we do the other side, exactly the same. You remember? I start the opposite way, which means the other one I started on the seam. This one I start on the shoulder, going down the lapel, which is lying inside between the two materials. 1 centimeter, going down this edge. Into my little corner. The bottom, the seam. And watch out all these seams that you have, that they're lying evenly, nicely on top of each other. Not that they're pushed once to the left, once to the right. You did all the same cutting, so they should be exactly on top of each other. The side we leave open. And we do the armhole. Let the machine take it in the round as it's lying on the machine. Don't try to pull it straight and thinking you have to do a straight seam. No, it's a round cutting and you go round. As well on this side, you have to cut around the armhole first for it to lie nicely. And you cut the corners a little bit again, so you can really turn them into nice corners. Especially that very sharp one here, that needs nicely evening out. Again, you go in your hole from the side. The shoulder is always also still open, as I said. You take your tool and push the corners into the position as you had planned them to look like. And here as well, I must just open this little shoulder part for my stitching now. Now it doesn't really matter where you start on this part. As you see here, I'm starting my millimeter stitching first of all on this armhole part. If you've chosen a lining material inside, which might have a different color, then make sure that the lining now, while you're with your fingers ribble this edge nicely out, that the lining does not show. Rather let the main material roll over a little bit to the left side, to the inside. Now we're closing this shoulder part, only 5 millimeters wide, because later on there will be a 1 centimeter seam. And we go along down this edge. Your lapel is lying to one side and you're stitching down this 1 millimeter part on the main material where the seam is lying inside. All the seams from the lapel and from all your two parts are lying towards that way where you're stitching on. As you've been seeing, I didn't iron this part. Again, I'm just doing it directly on the machine by rubbing out the edges nicely. It's always your choice if you prefer to go to your ironing board first and iron all the edges. Then the stitching, of course, is done very quickly as it's all flat for you already. I do it this way. The bottom is stitched and now you can close the side which was open now for you for turning it around. Which other words, you actually stitched all the way around this front part that you got finished now. And now I stitch this little lapel part onto the shoulder down again. Exactly the same we have to do now with the other side. I'm starting on the shoulder, going down the armhole, even it out nicely. Take your time, or iron it first and then stitch over. Now I'm closing the side, which is still open here, with a 5 millimeter one. 5 millimeter stitching, as my 1 centimeter seam will come there later on when I add the back onto it. The bottom of my front. And the front, the middle. Again, here you see my lapel is lying to the right side, same as on the other side it was. I close the shoulder by also right away stitching this lapel down. You see, this is also very nice from the left side. Then it's really flat, as if I ironed it. This happens automatically with the stitching. Now my two parts are totally finished, and meanwhile I already took the right side for the lady's waistcoat and put the buttonholes in, because it's always easier than to do it when the whole jacket is finished or waistcoat is finished. Now you take your two back parts, your lining and your outside back, and you stitch the sleeve, the sleeve hole, the neck and the other sleeve hole. You leave everything else open. 1 centimeter, the first sleeve hole. You leave the shoulder open. You do the neck part. Edge on edge. Don't pull the round from the neck straight. Leave it lying round and then push it slowly in the curve into the machine. Again, you leave the shoulder open. And you do the other sleeve hole. 1 centimeter. Everything else stays open for the moment. Now you need your scissors, and you have to cut all the way around wherever you have a very strong round. You do the same on the neck, only then it will nicely lie flat without any pulling. The same with this sleeve hole. In this soft material that I have, if the cut ends are about 1 centimeter apart, is almost enough. If it's straight like that on the top, you don't need to do any cutting there. But if you have a very hard material, you have to do maybe even more cuttings. Now you slightly open this, take your first finished front and push it in between the two backs up to the shoulder. This finished front part, really push it against your seam that is from the neck stitching to the armhole stitching. It's got to be exactly in that corner, and you do your 1 centimeter seam here. Look right away towards the ending. If you did the correct cutting for your parts, the exact stitching with 1 centimeter, this should fit in exactly. All the way to the end. And of course, here again, make sure you had all seams lying edge on edge. You take your other part and push it into the shoulder that's still open. The same here. Push the finished front part really into the edge of that last stitch from your sleeve hole. Edge on edge. Look towards the neck. Push the part in or pull it slightly down again if you pushed it through too far. 1 centimeter seam into that corner there. Now I just show you what that looks like. That means that part is practically finished. Coming down from your neck part onto the lapel to the front, and the same on the side where the sleeve hole is. But now at the moment we're pulling this back again as we're not quite finished. You see the sides are all still open. So first now you have the right on the right, you stitch the side on, but not a full, try to stay on a like 9 millimeters, not a full centimeter, because later we want to overcover that seam. The back is not, the bottom of the back is not been stitched yet. That means you have to let it stand over 1 centimeter for your seam to happen later on. Now you stitch this front part onto the back, exactly onto your stitching where your armhole sleeve was just stitched together. You see it on this side. You start exactly where your last stitch is there. Put this front part onto it and stitch it on 8 or 9 millimeters. Not quite a full centimeter, that comes later. And you have 1 centimeter of the back standing over again on the bottom there. Now you clap this part down. Turn it around and you see your seam there. The loose back part is lying on the bottom now. And you just go 1 millimeter over your seam so it will not show out on the other side. Just cover that seam up, which was 9 millimeters, and now you're on 1 centimeter. You're stitching the side, all parts together on this first side. Now the front part is 1 centimeter shorter than your two backs, if you did it correctly. And you stitch now the bottom of the back, 1 centimeter. Put the seams, when you get to them, nicely on top of each other. so they're exactly even when you turn it around then. Here comes this little round that I cut in the middle of the back. You can make yourself a pattern and draw this to make sure you're very even, and then slowly, evenly go around this curve. Now I push my front in, not to stitch it on where I don't want it. I put my seams on top of each other and I go to the other side, to the side seam. You had also there from the two back parts 1 centimeter standing over, and in that corner is your front already stitched on. Now we have to think about where do we want to turn that jacket, that waistcoat around, and therefore we will leave on this side a hole. That means I will stitch here about 6-7 centimeters. There I leave a hole, and I do the same on the top. You just go this 1 millimeter over the seam that you see from your seam from before. Again, you have to cut some of your corners, your edges. You of course could have also left the hole to turn the waistcoat over somewhere on the bottom. You don't need to have that on the side like I did it. Also here I cut the edges, and this round I have to make little cuts into it to immediately lie flat. Another corner there. On this bottom I don't need to do any cutting because it's so soft, my material, that doesn't need any cuts, and the curve that is down there is also not so big. So now you go inside the hole that you've left, and you go always in the farthest corner that you have. Grab that and start pulling it around. And take your time for that, because very, very easily you can rip your seam that is holding the edges of that hole. You can rip that in, and you have more damage that you would like, yeah. So slowly, bit by bit, turn this around to the proper side. Now, if you decide not to stitch the edges on all parts, you could just iron all the way around, put your buttons on, and you would be finished. And by hand you would have to just close this little hole. But we're stitching, as I said before, all the way around. On the right side of the material, as that's always the nicer stitching. As the whole front part is finished stitched already, I start on the side to continue my stitch from the front. You, with your fingers again, rubble out the edges really nicely. And I just realized I've forgotten to push my corners through. That means I just have to stop. I take my scissors, go into the hole that I still got, and push my two corners out. Don't push your tool through. Make sure you stay inside and only nicely do the corners. There you go. Now we continue where I just stopped. I'm not stitching back and forward, as that usually gives a funny looking seam. I rather stitch 3-4 stitches over where I just stopped earlier on. And here on the round you can see I'm not pulling the material straight towards me. No, I let it lie on the table in the round as it is cut, as it is stitched, and I slowly let the machine take the material in and let it stitch over. Again, to repeat, you can iron this first before you stitch over. That makes it easier for yourself. So my front is stitched. That means here I change around. That is my side that we totally got closed. There is no hole. And I stitch on the back part, because that's where the seam is lying, up towards my sleeve hole. It's practically once around the part you've just put together. That's my sleeve hole again. Let the curve lie on your table, machine table, as it is cut, as the form of the coat or waistcoat is. Now I got to the shoulder, as the front is finished stitched. I'm going over the shoulder. And I do the neck part. As I mentioned in the beginning of the tutorial, if this is too slow for you, just speed it up on your computer. But I wanted to show you exactly, step by step, the exact time of doing this waistcoat. There's nothing been speeded up. This is my original speed that you're watching here now, on every part that we did. Okay, here's your side seam now. And that's where we got the hole in. Now you must go underneath with your hands, with your fingers, and try to lie it exactly onto the seam that you got there, to be able to grab it with your stitching over that you do right now. In case if you're not so firm with this sewing yet and you will miss it and there will still be a hole on the left side, it doesn't matter. Then take a little needle with a thread and just close it with some little hand stitches. But here you can see my hole is closed. That means my complete sewing part of this jacket is actually finished. I've done the buttonholes already earlier on, as I said, but I still have to stitch all the buttons on. Check it all over again when you sew far. Look at the beautiful part you've done. Come and see me to all my next tutorials, hopefully. Maybe you even luck into me that you will find out whenever I'm sending a new tutorial through to you. I'm definitely looking forward to get some comments from you and hope very much that you've been enjoying this nice video to make your first own beautiful little waistcoat. Bye, until next time.